One alternative you can use when you're writing code with if statements is the nested if statement, where we have an if statement inside another if statement. Let me demonstrate how that works. We have our payroll program that we've already started, and we might put a further restriction on overtime pay by saying that we only pay overtime to people who make $20 an hour or less. If you make over $20 an hour, then you don't get overtime. You may be considered a management at that point. So the way we can do that is we can say if, so let's go back. The first condition is, are the hours greater than 40? I mean, that has to be true before we even begin to think about whether or not to pay overtime. Then, once we do that, then we can look at, well, if rate is less than $20 per hour, then we're just going to say pay overtime. I don't want to get into all the different calculations there. And then we can have an else after this, cout pay regular pay. And then we can still have an else after this. Like so. So let's take a look at how the nested if works. The nested if works by, we have an outer if, that's our first test. If that expression is true, then we have another comparison to make, another decision that we have to make before we can decide whether or not to continue paying overtime. If that's not true, then we can have an else that matches this inner if, the nested if, and then we go out of the if statement altogether and into the outer else, which indicates that we're just going to pay regular pay. While we're looking at this is a good time to talk about indentation and style of programming. Notice how easy it is to understand the flow of this programming because I'm using consistent indentation. Do we have to indent code? Absolutely not. Now this editor that we're using with code blocks enforces indentation, but you could write code in just a plain text editor. And in that text editor, it may or may not have automatic indentation. But as an experiment, you should try writing code without any indentation and look how much harder it is, or discover for yourself how much harder it is to understand the flow of the program when you're not using indentation than it is when you do use indentation like I'm doing here. Because here I can clearly see that we have a nested if inside the original if, and that even my statements inside my ifs are indented so that it's very easy for me to see exactly how this program works. So let's run it with a couple of different possibilities here. So if we say 45, this person made more than $20 an hour, so I'll tell you what let's do. Let's have the rate entered also. So we're going to here we go. So we'll say 45 hours and then make $15 an hour. So we'll see that it says to pay overtime. Let's do 44 hours and $21 an hour. That person gets regular pay. Let's do 35 hours and let's do $30 per hour. And that person still gets regular pay because the number of hours are less than 35. So to summarize, we've demonstrated how you can use a if statement inside another if statement We call that a nested if, and that can be used to further delineate a decision based on a second comparison. And you can nest as deeply as you want to, though usually after one or two nestings of if statements, the logic gets to be so confusing that you probably need to rethink how you've written the program. But the point is that you can nest if statements, and it's fairly common to see if statements nested if the situation calls for them. And with that, we've wrapped up this lesson on nested ifs.